Rick Scarborough and Recover America, thank you for watching once again. We're in the second part of a two-part interview with my good friend Paul Blair, former Chicago Bear. You can tell by looking at him that he played professional football, and you also tell by following he walks because he limps and his shoulders hurt. He bears in his body the marks of a professional football player. It's good to have you back for the second follow-up interview, Paul.
Thank you, buddy. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
I was kidding, by the way. You walk quite normally.
Oh, no.
I was just kidding. I do know that he's had a lot of surgeries. I mean, don't kid yourself. These guys playing professional athletics are earning their pay, and they often pay for it for the rest of their lives.
We make poor decisions in our youth, and we pay for it when we get older.
Let me give you a word of advice. Even though I'm getting arthritis and hurting a lot in my joints, I never mention it for one reason. The Bible says I ache in my body because of the sins of my youth. And I've lied about sinning for so long.
Good counsel, Pastor.
It really is true. You know, Paul, in all seriousness, two things I want to do in this follow-up interview. If you didn't see the first one, make sure you look on our website and watch the initial interview with this brother. That's where we did his biographical information and talked a little bit about his calling. But Paul, 5 years ago, you called me. We've been friends, dear friends, had spoken all over the country together, and you had the worst diagnosis a preacher can get, throat cancer. Talk to our people about how you discovered that and your journey through cancer.
Well, it was an unusual type of cancer. It was most interesting because I had just by coincidence had been in for a dental checkup in the first week of December of 2018, and my good friend and dentist Jeff Baggett.
As your senior,
yeah,
there are no coincidences with God's
No,
people.
I'm with you. I'm with you. But he spent an hour in my mouth and everything looked normal. And then I remember over the holidays as I was preaching, I even mentioned it to the congregation. I felt like I was fighting off some sort of a cold or flu. I just assumed so because I'd had this itch and stuff back in my throat. And then it continued to get worse. And the first week of the new year in January of 2019, Cindy and I woke up the very first Friday of that week and walked into the bathroom, getting ready for the day. I took my phone, turned the light on, and looked in the mirror and shined it in the back of my throat. And it was so obvious. It was so, in fact, what was odd is that it was a part of my throat that was just not there. And I thought, am I seeing things right? I know what a throat's supposed to look like, and it's not supposed to look like that. And I said to Cindy, I don't know what throat cancer looks like, but I think I've got it. And then, of course, my doctor, my family doctor, happened to be a member of my congregation. So I texted him and was able to get in and see him this afternoon. That began the process. And a week later, I was into an ear, nose, and throat specialist, and they did an exam in the office and discovered within 24 hours that I did have, in fact, throat cancer. Of course, that first weekend, Cindy and I were scheduled. We actually were very busy. And it was not by coincidence, Rick, you're right. The very week that I was diagnosed with throat cancer was the week that Dan Fisher came on staff at Fairview and joined us there. So
God's sovereignty.
Well, I had an unplanned 6 months in Houston and a very unpleasant journey that year. Our church was well cared for. But I remember Cindy and I were I was diagnosed with cancer, and we were supposed to fly to Florida the next day. So we looked at each other and said, well, we can either sit here and look at each other, or we can go ahead and do what God called us to do. So we went to Florida and tried to fulfill our speaking engagements, went through some testing while we were down there, worked aggressively, and came back. And I remember the next weekend I had called my dear friend, because one thing that people don't understand is pastors don't have pastors. Most people go, I need to talk to my pastor. I need to unload a burden. I need somebody to give me some counsel and hug me around the neck and tell me it's going to be okay. Pastors don't have pastors, so we just kind of either try to self-diagnose or just take it to the Lord. But I have a good friend that spent a lifetime in ministry, and we were on the phone on a Saturday morning. I remember we were in our master bedroom, and you and Tommy were on the phone and had it on speakerphone. We had ours on speakerphone, and you said this, and there's a reason we go through these. We are able to better minister to our flock when you have walked down the valley of the shadow of death yourself. You obviously, with the loss of your daughter, you too have had to walk through a journey of great pain. And you gave me wise counsel that I've never forgotten it. You said, Paul, you've got to decide right now that regardless of the outcome, you're going to glorify God in the midst of all this.
You know, the background of that is when we found our daughter, Catherine, and I won't go into detail here, there'll be another time for that, but at the age of 25, she died in our home. And she'd had a serious illness that she'd battled for 7 years, but we didn't expect her to die. And I remember before we called my parents who lived next door, we lived on acreage at the time, Tommy and I held our hands and we were weeping and sobbing as only a parent would at the loss of a child. And I said, honey, we have counseled people all our lives that no matter what happens, God's in control. And I said, we're going to choose, no matter how bad this hurts, that we're going to glorify God. And we did that. And we lived through that. And that was the simple advice that I gave to my brother.
Well, thank you for it. I've never forgotten it.
You know, Dr. Holtze said, our mutual friend, speaking to all these pastors at this conference, which we'll talk about shortly, he said that he's a coach. I take that back. It was in an interview. And he's talking about giving people medical advice. He said, but the best thing I can do is coach you. You have to make the choices. So what we did is we coached you, but you and Cindy made the choice. And I admire you for the choice you made.
Well, you have been a good friend, and I thank you for what you did for us. And, you know, as a pastor, I think we both can testify that the Bible preaches a whole lot easier than it lives sometimes. It's a whole lot easier to preach about Job and try to learn some things from a distance rather than actually walk down that valley yourself.
And that was a valley you walked for years.
Yes, sir.
Because in addition, I mean, a pastor who has throat cancer, he couldn't cut it out because he'd lose his larynx. Talk about that.
Well, I went to 2 different doctors. Of course, you insisted that we go to MD Anderson because they were the best, and we did, and ultimately wound up moving to Houston, getting treated down there. But both the doctor in Oklahoma City at Stevenson and the doctor in MD Anderson, first thing they said was, well, we can't operate on you because we'd have to remove too much of your tongue and throat. So we have to take that off the table. The only thing we can do is radiation and chemotherapy, and we prescribe both. And we're going to beat this. We believe we're going to beat it. And of course, with medical advancements, 20 years ago, throat cancer was a death sentence. Well, now they've got a very good batting average. And let me tell you, having radiation on your throat, of course, not able to eat, you lose your taste buds, you lose your salivary glands. And
your ability to speak.
And your ability to speak. Yeah. I had to go through some training to try to regain some speech. And even right now, I have a hole in my throat. It's not supposed to be there. If you were looking inside there.
Yeah, but now you talk like Paul. But I was with him when he was struggling to communicate. So it was a journey.
Well, glory to God because I'm like I liken it to the duck you see on the pond. You see the duck on the surface, it looks real smooth. What you don't see is underneath, those legs are really working hard. Right. I've got to work really hard to talk these days, but it hasn't slowed me down.
It has a powerful message.
Well, thank you, buddy.
5 years now, but you've been declared cancer-free, is that right?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. You know, it was actually kind of a discouraging day. You know, you complete your treatment, and the big deal is you go in and ring the bell. And so we got in and went in and rang the bell. It's like, okay, now what? It's like, goodbye. It's like, well, am I cured? What next? Bye. We're done with the treatment. So, you know, it was really kind of figuring it out.
They don't say cured until several years later.
That's it. I had 3 years of checkups, and you go back initially. First year it's every 3 months, and then it's twice a year, and then finally, after 3 years, if the CT scans are clear, they will pronounce you a cancer survivor. So I am now officially a cancer survivor. But, you know, honestly, buddy, I never, one thing that was most interesting, and I do think it's important to share this. As I said, when Cindy and I were diagnosed on a Friday, Cindy and I, we're one couple. I had the cancer, but she had to babysit me and live with it. We had come to Orlando the next day because they had speaking engagements. And we were up in the north suburbs, literally walking around a lake called Cranes Roost Lake. And the thing that was most amazing as we were walking together is I didn't have one doubt about my eternity. It was like, wow, I know I'm ready for heaven. But there were 3 things that I wanted to see if God would allow me to live. As I wanted to see both of my sons get married. And over the last 3 years, I've been able to perform both of those services. I wanted to see grandchildren. And now I have a grandbaby.
So you're halfway there.
I'm halfway there, right? And I wanted to grow old with Cindy. And so we're not old yet, but at 60, we're hitting third base. And of course, my body is,
let's not push this
I know,
too much. But you're pushing me right on up.
But I hate to tell you this, but as many times you and I have been hit in the head, we haven't done anything that's going to benefit us as we get older. But I want to live. We want to be together. We've been together. Of course, we're following you and Tommy, but we're 33 years. So I can't imagine leaving her alone. Amen. And I wanted to grow old with her. And
my wife gets really intimidated when she hears me pray that she precedes me in death. She said, what in the world is that about? It's because I don't want her to ever live a day by herself. But I want her to precede me in death by one day, and I want to be when we're 120. But I have often prayed, I don't want to see her alone because she's the love of my life. And I love her so much that I wouldn't want her to.
Well, you know what? If you do it right, I can't remember not being married. Can't remember.
No, I can't either.
Married. So it's who you are now.
I tell you, one of the most frightening days of my life was we both, have a handgun license. And in Texas, you don't have to have one anymore, but we used to. Yeah. And we took the course together. Then we went and did the actual shooting. And she beat me. And man, I didn't sleep for months. I mean, she could outshoot me every night. I thought, man, what do I do today? Is she going to shoot me tonight? All joking aside, now you have a ministry beyond your church. You're impacting now into the hundreds of churches. Talk about the Liberty Church movement, what you're doing and how these things are unfolding.
Well, I've been a senior pastor for almost 22 years now and have been engaging the culture since I met you, 15 plus years ago. But there's been a lot of the, so-called, join the Black Robe Regiment or be the modern day patriot pastor. Let's engage the culture. But it's generally little more than add your name to this list and we'll call you something. Well, that's nonsense. You can no more just become a Black Robe Regiment pastor than you can just become a special forces member. You've got to go through the training to earn the title of being part of the special forces. And most pastors, sadly, Rick, we go through our education, and most pastors are taught not to think biblically in economics and in civil government. In fact, we're told we're not supposed to talk about those things. Well, that's nonsense. Where did that rule come from? Yep. And of course, when you think about it, Jesus isn't just the Lord of Sunday morning. Jesus is supposed to be the Lord 24/7. And, going back into our Hebraic roots, to be a Christian means to be a follower of Christ. Well, we're supposed to be following Christ, not just on Sunday mornings, but 24/7. But most pastors don't know the first clue about civil government, God's design of it and intentions for it. Most pastors don't know the first clue about biblical economics. In fact, most are amazed to find that there are actually more verses about economics in the Bible than there are about prayer.
That's right.
But so we've done a poor job of being trained to make disciples, which is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be making disciples. What's a disciple? A follower of Christ. When do we follow Christ? 24/7. Right. So what we do with these pastor camps is we get these guys away from their office, lovely hotel, thanks to Art Alley and some of our donors, generous donors that want to see the culture changed. We want them to have a second honeymoon. We want them to develop some great relationships with some like-minded pastors because there's strength in numbers. But then we have 20 hours where we pour into them with continuing education.
It's seminary level education too.
It's by design. It's biblical, Bible-based, and it's one lesson builds upon the next. So
some of the special guests they bring in are incredible experts, and you can go to libertypastor.com and you can see the very presentations that these pastors where we are this week have heard. But talk about a few of those experts that we bring in and what they speak to.
Well, we bring in experts. Bob McEwen talks about biblical principles of economics. Exactly right. Of course, we have Matt Staver. We teach the pastors about their legal rights, but then it always helps to have an attorney that can back you up.
And a guy that's spoken before the Supreme Court and never lost a case. He's a brilliant
attorney who loves Jesus more than anything.
Also a pastor, by the way.
Absolutely. We've got doctors, Christian doctors that come in and speak about the COVID pandemic. You know, quite frankly, as we have learned, most of what we have lived through the last couple of years could have been avoided if it hadn't been from interference.
Planned, exactly
right. And it all goes back to the World Economic Forum and the desire to...
Which we also teach them.
Alex Newman comes in and talks about global governance. We talk about critical race theory. That's the modern Trojan horse to bring in old Marxism under a new name, but that's what they're trying to use that in America. We teach about LGBTQ plus agenda. And of course, you're rallying pastors to take back the school boards here in the state of Texas. So on day one, opening night, we knock down the wall. We do a message called compartmentalization, and we recognize that it's nonsensical to say Jesus is not the Lord of this area of my life. Jesus is the Lord of all of my life. Whatever we do, we're to glorify God in it. Then, of course, Dan does his presentation on bringing back the Black Robe Regiment. We learn about those bold pastors.
And this is Dan Fisher, the author of the book Black Robe Regiment. If you don't have that pastor in your library, you certainly ought to get it.
Literally, if it wasn't for the pastors, we wouldn't be sitting here. The pastors taught the colonists a biblical worldview, biblical principles of civil government. And actually,
they led them.
Exactly. Then on our first day, we begin systematically teaching them what the Bible has to say about civil government. We start with a session called Biblical Principles of Civil Government. Fact is, every pastor that comes out of seminary would answer this question correctly. If you said, Pastor, what are the three institutions that God established on planet Earth? Every one of them would say the home, the church, and civil government. Well, if that is in fact true, then it's just as biblical to teach your people or disciple your people about the biblical intention, God's design for civil government and limitations of civil government, as it is to teach about self-government or family government or church government.
Right.
So we begin equipping these guys and showing them chapter and verse, what actually was on the minds of our founding fathers that caused them to take the stands that they did. They believed that government was supposed to be, that the governing officials were supposed to be ministers of God to thee for good, punishing evil and protecting the good, that we may live peaceably in all godliness. God didn't design tyranny.
Right.
So we teach them all those things, and we systematically build one lesson upon the next until, of course, on our final day, we have you share your testimony and give that great challenge. And then we literally, after 20 hours of education, invite these pastors to come and sign parchment saying that we want to take the next step. We're signing up, just as they did in 1776. We're signing up for the battle. These guys are signing up for the battle.
And when this is over, those of us, and especially Paul, who has a primary role all through the weekend or 3 days, we're exhausted, but we're exhilarated. Because the expressions on these pastors' faces, the testimonials they share,
the tears,
it makes it all worthwhile. If you're listening and you're a layman that God has entrusted with wealth, there is no place you could invest dollars than in this effort for us to train these pastors. Each event costs between $100,000 and $150,000, depending on the venue and the length of days. But I had two board members at this one. One called me after it was over crying, literally crying. He said, man, we've got to get this, we got to get more pastors. We've got to get this out there because, you know something, you're sitting on all that wealth and this country continues down the path of cultural Marxism and tyranny. That money's not going to be worth a thing. In fact, they're trying right now to destroy the value of the dollar. And that's not going to be stopped unless it's stopped. And part of the training is how to stop it. It's all about a third great awakening. And nobody is leading the charge more than Pastor Paul Blair. His website is
libertypastors.com.
And by the way, if you want to watch a church that has become a true biblical church, you can see he and Dan preaching every Sunday. Their online congregation is growing exponentially. My name is Rick Scarborough. We're seeking to recover America, and you've been watching Recover America. God bless you. Have a great day.